Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
Hayden Vexer stepped out of his ship, the Iron Claw, and scanned the barren landscape of Vora's 9. The winds howled with a dry intensity, swirling dust and ash across the ground. His boots crunched against the cracked earth as he moved toward the rendezvous point, his black coat billowing behind him like the wings of some dark creature. Vora's 9 was a desolate place, forgotten by the galaxy, yet it was here that he'd been called, here where his services as a specialist were needed. The galaxy didn't remember Vexer, but he didn't care. In fact, he preferred it that way. He was a ghost now, a man lost to time and war, drifting through forgotten corners of space. His mission was simple, to complete the job and move on, leaving no trace. But there was a deep hunger inside him, a thirst that was never fully quenched, not by the bloodshed nor the credits he earned from each successful contract. It gnawed at him, a void he didn't quite understand. As he approached the dilapidated facility where his new employers waited, Vexer flexed his gloved fingers. They were thick, powerful hands, the kind that could crush a man's throat without hesitation. His mind drifted to the last mission, a massacre in a jungle on the remote world of Trilios. He remembered the smell of scorched earth and the way the bodies had piled up at his feet. It had been exhilarating, the kind of brutal combat he lived for. Yet something was missing, something he had once thought gone from his life for good. Connection. And it infuriated him. Inside the facility, the lights flickered as if struggling to maintain power. He stepped through the metal doors, his sharp eyes instantly locking onto the three figures standing near a holographic table. One of them, a tall figure draped in heavy armor with glowing red eyes, turned to him. The alien species was one Vexer recognized immediately, the Ralphak. He'd killed enough of them in his time to know their weaknesses well. "You're late," the Ralphak commander growled, his voice deep and resonant, vibrating through the room. "Traffic," Vexer replied dryly, pulling back his hood to reveal a face chiseled by both scars and experience. His dark hair, cut close to the scalp, only made his sharp features more pronounced. Another figure, a human woman with silver implants embedded in her skin, stepped forward. She was different. She had an air of cold authority, the kind that came with running Black Ops missions. Her eyes were glowing, the way augmented humans often did when connected to their neural systems. "We don't have time for pleasantries, Vexer. The target is in the tunnels beneath us," she said, her tone clinical. "You'll find that the payment has already been transferred to your account. The rest is up to you." Vexer smirked. "So what's down there? Just another job, or something special?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "Let's just say, the usual methods won't work. Your expertise is why we called you." He raised a brow, intrigued. "Sounds like you're sending me into a trap." "You're here because you're the best, Vexer. So, stop wasting time." Without another word, Vexer turned on his heel and headed toward the entrance to the underground. The air grew colder as he descended the stairs, the dim lights casting eerie shadows across the walls. His heart quickened. There was something different about this mission, something more dangerous than anything he'd faced before. He felt it in his bones. The tunnel stretched before him, long and winding, illuminated only by the dim red glow of emergency lights. The sound of dripping water echoed faintly, but otherwise, there was nothing, just silence. A part of him enjoyed the quiet. It was the calm before the storm, the moment when everything was about to go wrong. Vexer's hand hovered over the hilt of his blade, ready to draw at the slightest sound. As he moved deeper into the tunnels, he could feel something in the air, a tension that set his nerves on edge. It was like the very walls themselves were watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then he saw it. A figure stood at the far end of the corridor, shrouded in darkness. It was tall, with long, slender limbs that almost scraped the ceiling. Its eyes glowed a faint blue, staring directly at him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. Vexer drew his blade, the metal whispering as it slid free. "I've been waiting for this," he muttered under his breath, his grip tightening around the handle. The creature didn't move, but he could feel its presence bearing down on him, oppressive and overwhelming. It was ancient, something not of this world, something primal. And it was hungry. With a snarl, Vexer charged forward, his blade slicing through the air in a deadly arc. The creature responded with terrifying speed, its limbs lashing out like whips. But Vexor was faster, ducking under the blow and slashing upward with lethal precision. Blood, black and oily, sprayed across the walls as the creature let out an unearthly scream. But Vexor wasn't done. He pressed the attack, driving his blade into the beast's side and twisting it with brutal force. It shrieked again, its body convulsing as it tried to escape, but Vexor held firm, his muscles straining as he pushed the blade deeper. "Not so tough now, are you?" he hissed, gritting his teeth as he drove the creature to the ground. With one final, sickening crunch, the creature fell still. Its body collapsed into a heap, lifeless and broken. Breathing heavily, Vexor wiped the sweat from his brow and sheathed his blade. He glanced down at the remains of the creature, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. This was what he lived for: the thrill of combat, the rush of adrenaline, the satisfaction of knowing that he was still the best. But even as he turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. This was just the beginning. Something darker, more dangerous, was waiting for him in the shadows. And he was ready. Hayden Vexor wiped the creature's black blood from his blade, his heart still pounding from the rush of battle. Yet, the unease lingered. This was too easy. The mission had an underlying current of danger, one that had him on edge, but he hadn't faced anything he couldn't handle. The tunnels stretched endlessly before him, illuminated by the same red emergency lights, casting long, ominous shadows. As Vexor moved deeper into the labyrinth, the temperature dropped noticeably. His breath came out in short, visible bursts, and a shiver ran down his spine. The air felt thick with something unseen, an almost tangible sense of malevolence that gnawed at the edges of his awareness. Something wasn't right down here. He stopped at a fork in the tunnels, narrowing his eyes as he surveyed the paths ahead. Both were dark, foreboding, and silent, but something about the left tunnel drew him in. It was more than instinct. It was as if something called to him, beckoning him forward. "Guess I'll take the scenic route," Vexor muttered under his breath. He moved forward, his steps deliberate and cautious, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, ready for anything. The silence weighed heavily on him, broken only by the distant sound of water dripping from the ceiling. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on all sides, amplifying every breath, every heartbeat. Vexor was no stranger to danger. He had faced down some of the deadliest creatures and enemies the galaxy had to offer. But this was different. This place felt alive, and not in the way a bustling city or a thriving ecosystem did. No, this was something darker, something that shouldn't be alive but was. And it was watching him. Suddenly, a soft, eerie whisper echoed through the tunnels, faint and unintelligible. Vexor froze, his muscles tensing as he scanned the darkness around him. The whisper came again, this time closer, like a breath against the back of his neck. He spun around, his blade drawn in an instant, but there was nothing, just the empty, oppressive darkness. "Shit," he muttered, taking a step back, his senses on high alert. Something was playing with him, something intelligent. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't afford to lose his edge now. As he continued down the path, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from all directions, swirling around him like a malevolent wind. And then he saw it, faint figures in the dark, just beyond the reach of the emergency lights. They moved like shadows, barely visible, yet undeniably present. He wasn't alone. Vexor's grip tightened around his blade as the shadows drew closer, their movements fluid and unnatural. They surrounded him, but they didn't attack. Instead, they simply watched, their glowing blue eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Come out and fight, you cowards!" Vexor snarled, his voice echoing through the tunnels. But the shadows didn't move. They just hovered there, silent and still, like predators waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. She was tall, her body sleek and alien, yet undeniably feminine. Her skin was a deep, dark hue, like polished obsidian, and her eyes glowed with the same blue light as the others. But there was something different about her, something more tangible. Her presence was overwhelming, dominating the space with an aura of power and control. "I've heard much about you, Hayden Vexer," she said, her voice smooth as silk, laced with an edge of danger. Vexer's eyes narrowed, his grip on his weapon unyielding. "Yeah? And who the hell are you?" The woman stepped closer, her movements graceful and fluid, like a predator stalking its prey. "Call me Zara," she purred, her gaze never leaving his. "I've been waiting for you." Vexer's jaw tightened. There was something about her, something that stirred an unfamiliar heat in his chest. She was beautiful in an alien way, but it was more than that. Her presence was magnetic, drawing him in despite the danger. "And why would you be waiting for me?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Zara smiled, her sharp, pearly teeth glinting in the dim light. "Because you're the only one who can survive what's coming." Before he could respond, she moved closer, her body brushing against his. Vexer tensed, every muscle in his body coiled, ready to strike, but something held him back. Her scent was intoxicating, a blend of alien spices and something darker, something that sent a shiver of both anticipation and dread down his spine. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Vexer," Zara whispered, her lips brushing against his ear. "But you will. Soon." She pulled back, her glowing eyes locking onto his with a predatory intensity. "Follow me if you want to live." Without waiting for his response, she turned and began walking down the tunnel, her movements impossibly graceful. The shadows followed her, retreating into the darkness as if commanded by her will. Vexer hesitated, every instinct telling him not to trust her. But there was something about her, something that made him want to follow, despite the danger. His pulse quickened as he weighed his options, the cold air biting at his skin. "Fuck it," he muttered under his breath, and followed her into the darkness. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, winding deeper into the bowels of the planet. The whispers faded, replaced by a low, thrumming sound that reverberated through the walls. The air grew colder, and Vexer could feel a strange pressure building in his chest, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on him. Zara led him into a vast chamber, the walls lined with strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly light. At the center of the room stood a massive, ancient structure, a monolith carved from black stone, its surface covered in intricate, alien markings. The air around it hummed with raw energy, and Vexer could feel the power radiating from it, palpable and overwhelming. "This is what you came for," Zara said, her voice low and reverent. "The heart of Voraz." Vexer's eyes narrowed as he approached the monolith, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "What is this?" Zara's smile was dark, seductive. "It's the key to everything. Power beyond your wildest dreams. But it comes at a price." Vexer raised an eyebrow, his suspicion deepening. "And what's the price?" Zara stepped closer, her body pressing against his as she whispered in his ear. "Your soul." Hayden Vexer stared at the monolith, feeling the immense energy radiating from it, as if the stone was alive, pulsing with power. The dim light flickered across the alien carvings, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Zara's words echoed in his mind, "Power beyond your wildest dreams." But the price she mentioned gnawed at him. "My soul," Vexer said, his voice steady, though his gut twisted with unease. "You're saying this thing will take my soul?" Zara's lips curled into a knowing smile, her glowing eyes flickering like embers. "Everything has a cost, Hayden. But what is a soul compared to the power you could wield? The heart of Voraz can give you dominion over life and death, control over time and space. You could reshape the galaxy itself." She stepped closer, her hands brushing against his chest, her touch both electric and chilling. "Isn't that what you've always wanted? To be more than just a ghost wandering through forgotten worlds? To be feared, respected, desired." Vexer's heart raced, but not from fear. Her words were like a drug, intoxicating, filling his mind with visions of conquest, of victory. The hunger inside him, the void he had never been able to fill, stirred restlessly. Power. The idea of it sank into him like a hook, pulling him closer to the edge. But something else lingered in his mind, doubt. He had fought through countless wars, seen death, betrayal, and destruction on a galactic scale. He had always survived, but he had never allowed himself to lose what little humanity remained. Would giving in to this power mean sacrificing the last part of himself? Why me? Vexor asked, his voice low. What makes me the one to use this thing? Zara's smile widened, her teeth glinting like sharpened blades. Because you're not like the others. You're already broken, but you're still standing. You've been through hell and back, yet you haven't given up. The heart doesn't seek the perfect, it seeks the relentless. She leaned closer, her breath hot against his ear. And you, Hayden Vexor, are relentless. His pulse quickened, and for a brief moment he considered it. He could feel the pull of the heart, the promise of ultimate power just within reach. The galaxy was a chaotic, unforgiving place. With this power, he could shape it to his will, carve out a place for himself where no one could challenge him. But then, deep in his mind, a thought surfaced. What's left after power? Vexor stepped back, breaking the contact between them, his hand tightening on the hilt of his blade. No. Zara's eyes flashed, her expression shifting from seductive to something darker, more dangerous. No, she hissed, her voice dripping with disbelief. You're turning down immortality? You're walking away from the chance to become a god. Vexor's eyes hardened. I've seen enough to know that power like this comes with chains, not freedom. I've fought my whole life for control, over myself, over my fate. I won't give that up for a false promise. Zara's expression twisted into one of fury, her body radiating a dark, malevolent energy. You think you can refuse me, Hayden Vexor? You don't understand what you're dealing with. The heart of Voras was never a choice, it was destiny. The shadows around the room surged, the air crackling with dark energy. The glowing symbols on the walls began to pulse violently, and the ground beneath Vexor's feet trembled. Zara's form distorted, her beauty shifting into something monstrous, her features elongating into sharp, jagged edges. Her eyes burned with an unholy fire as she raised her hands, calling the shadows to her. You were supposed to be mine, she hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally. Now you'll die like all the others who thought they could defy me. The shadows lunged at Vexor, tendrils of darkness writhing through the air like snakes. But he was ready. With a swift motion, he drew his blade, the sound of metal ringing through the chamber. He moved like a force of nature, his body a blur of precision and strength. The blade sliced through the dark tendrils, the black energy dissipating with each strike. Vexor's movements were fluid, controlled, each step a calculated counter to the chaos around him. Zara screamed in rage, her form shifting and growing more grotesque, her once beautiful figure now a twisted mass of shadows and claws. She lunged at him, her movements wild and frenzied, but Vexor was faster. He dodged her attacks with ease, his blade flashing as it cut through her shadowy form. You made a mistake, Vexor growled, his eyes cold and determined. You thought you could control me. With a powerful strike, he plunged his blade into the heart of Voras, the ancient monolith shuddering as its dark energy surged through the room. Zara let out a shriek of agony as the energy that had once given her power began to unravel, tearing her apart from within. No, she screamed, her voice a twisted echo of her former self. You can't destroy it. You'll destroy everything. Vexor twisted the blade deeper into the monolith, the cracks spreading across its surface like spiderwebs. The chamber shook violently, the walls crumbling as the energy inside the heart exploded outward in a blinding flash of light. For a brief moment, everything went still. And then the monolith shattered. The explosion of energy was deafening, a blinding pulse that tore through the chamber, consuming everything in its path. The walls collapsed, and the ground beneath Vexor's feet gave way, but he didn't stop. He moved with purpose, cutting through the remaining tendrils of shadow as they withered and died. Zara's form flickered, her body dissolving into the very darkness she had commanded. Her final scream echoed through the chamber, fading into silence as the heart of Voras crumbled to dust. Vexor stood amidst the rubble, his chest heaving with exertion. The air was still, the oppressive energy that had once filled the room now gone. He glanced down at the shattered remains of the monolith, his blade still lodged in its core. It was over. Breathing heavily, Vexor wiped the sweat from his brow and sheathed his blade. The hunger inside him, the void that had driven him for so long, was still there, but it had quieted. He had made his choice. Power, true power, came from within, not from some cursed relic or dark promise. As he made his way back through the tunnels, the weight of what he had faced settled in. He had refused the temptation, turned away from the easy path. And though the hunger would never fully disappear, he knew he had won something far greater than power. He had won himself. The stars stretched out before him as he climbed back into the Iron Claw. He had no idea what awaited him in the galaxy beyond, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready. And he was free. End of story.